With the holiday season in full swing and technology flying off the shelves, we decided that now would be the perfect time to drop an iPhone 12 Pro review. So, roll the unboxing. Hello world, has had about 3 weeks with these phones and I'm just going to get it out there right off the bat. The iPhone 12 Pro Max is just too big for 95% of the market. I'm normally all about having bigger screens and I can usually tolerate a two-handed phone, but the 12 Pro Max is just too big for its design. The iPhone 12 family's angular design is great for the smaller devices, but the Pro Max just digs into your hand and it's uncomfortable to hold. The bigger deal breaker here is actually the weight of these phones. The smaller 12 Pro weighs about as much as my old Pixel 3 XL, and the Pro Max is in its own weight category entirely, coming in at over 220 grams. And yes, that right there is a Nintendo Switch. It's that big. The whole iPhone 12 family follows a squared-off design this year that I actually really like. It gives the iPhones a very down-to-earth but still elegant look. That doesn't mean it's perfect though. Aside from the sizing problems on the Pro Max that I mentioned earlier, Apple also made the entire 12 family thinner. Normally this small of a change wouldn't be an issue, but they also added MagSafe, which further cuts into battery space. This year's iPhone 12 has a 2800, give or take, milliamp hour battery as opposed to last year's almost 3100 milliamp hour power pack. More on this in the performance section. In terms of the screen, it hasn't changed much since last year. They're a little bigger, but the bezels and notch are the same as they were 4 years ago on the iPhone X. The camera bump on the back of the 12 Pro is fairly unchanged from the 11 Pro, save for the LiDAR sensor, but the 12 Pro Max's larger sensors give it a massive camera bump. This camera bump is probably the only one other than the Note 20 Ultra that's actually bugged me due to its thickness. You notice it a lot when you put the phone down on a table and you see how much it rocks back and forth. Otherwise, the design hasn't changed much from the iPhone 11 Pro. Same frosted glass, same stainless steel, and same lightning port on the bottom face. It's sad Apple didn't go USB-C this year, and most of the points docked in this section are for that reason alone. The thing with performance on mobile devices is that honestly, we don't need phones to be much faster at this point. That being said, Apple does stay in the lead once again with the A14 Bionic. System operations are fluid and photos process in a snap. Unfortunately, Geekbench is paid on iOS, and I refuse to spend $10 to benchmark one phone for a non-monetized video. However, I will say that iPhone 12's performance is well beyond acceptable, and the A14 Bionic inside will be more than enough for the average user. This year, Apple finally put OLED displays into all the iPhone 12 models, so almost 8 years later, they can finally have a lineup with phones that are all Full HD or higher. In a world of phones that are pushing even 1440p, this seems pretty bad for Apple, but honestly, 1080p is enough. At such small screen sizes, you can't really tell a difference anymore, so anything above Full HD will satisfy the average user. With that in mind, I'll give Apple a pass this year in the screen department, with one very small exception though. We did notice that our Pro Max unit had a display that was calibrated noticeably warmer than the 12 Pro. We tried it at low brightness, max brightness, and even different brightness settings on either phone, but nothing seemed to make the two display colors line up. The problem wasn't enough to be a deal breaker, but do keep this calibration error in mind if you plan on editing photos or video on the go. It is noticeable. Now, when it comes to speakers, the iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max both have fairly decent speakers. They suffer from the same problems that basically all phones have: lack of bass, narrow soundstage, etc. But there isn't really much you can do with that little space in phone chassis nowadays. One thing I do wish Apple did better was a stereo effect though. Coming from a Pixel 3 XL, which had an excellent left and right stereo setup, the iPhone 12's earpiece speaker is just a little bit lacking. But you know what isn't lacking? The battery. Both of these phones are comfortably able to last you a full day. In this review, I spent much more of my time with the smaller 12 Pro, and even that phone was able to push 2 full days on occasion. I usually end 18-hour days at about 20 to 30% with 4 to 6 hours of screen on time. The Pro Max's 31% larger battery could easily get people 2 days, no problem. All of this is considering your screen time is mostly social media though. iPhones tend to sip very little power when scrolling and performing everyday tasks, but the A14 Bionic pulls stupid amounts of power when you do anything moderately intensive, like using the camera or playing a light game. So if you plan on taking a lot of photos during your day, be sure to bring a power source because even the 12 Pro Max will be dead by the afternoon. Hopefully some of this can be fixed through software optimizations in future builds of iOS. And speaking of iOS, let's talk about software for a second. iOS is a great operating system. It's well optimized but still feels very smooth at the same time, it looks nice, and it supports phones for much longer than many Android manufacturers can. But it's also a dumpster fire at times. Most of these complaints involve the home screen, which is, in my opinion, the most important part to get right, as many users are looking at their screen every time they unlock their phone. So here's a list of things that should have been fixed 5 years ago in iOS. You still can't put app icons at the bottom of your screen. You can't customize how many icons you want on your screen. iOS 14 has widgets, but their sizing and placement is very locked down. Clearing notifications takes you 2 swipes. You can only do it from one direction, so half the time you open the damn camera by accident. If you leave a notification alone and that same app sends you a new notification, you now have 2 notifications in 2 different sections of your notification shade. The hidden apps drawer is just a mess. Please just give me an alphabetical list of my apps. I don't want your folders. I get that it's Apple, but the Google Assistant is objectively better than Siri, and there's no way to replace Siri with Google Assistant at all. And last but not least, echoing LTT's sentiments, T9 dialing somehow still isn't a thing. Look, while it may seem bad, this list is really just some quality of life improvements Apple could make. Without them, iOS is still a great piece of software that runs on iPhones. One of the reasons why iPhones sell so well is their tight integration, which is really well demonstrated with services like iMessage. Now here's the part everyone really wants to know about. In this age, DSLRs are basically extinct for the general public as smartphone cameras are getting to a point where they produce comparable photos with minimal effort. So let's go test these cameras. Now the iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max have very similar camera systems. Both carry 3 rear lenses and a LiDAR sensor. The biggest differences between the two models are the main sensor and the telephoto sensor. The Pro Max carries a 2.5 times telephoto lens rather than the smaller Pro's 2 times telephoto. In practice, this doesn't really make a huge difference since 2 times telephoto isn't enough to do anything like really useful. I feel like 5 times or 10 times telephoto is really where it starts to become like real zoom action. 2 times is just kind of a gimmick, honestly. The headline feature that Apple is pushing this year though is the larger sensor on the main lens of the Pro Max. This year's 12 megapixel main sensor is enlarged by about 47% on the Pro Max, and it has sensor shift stabilization. For those of you who don't know, sensor shift stabilization works differently from traditional optical image stabilization in the sense that it shifts the sensor rather than the lens to cancel out small movements that you make when you're taking photos. It usually results in better stabilization since there's less mass to move compared to a bunch of glass. In practice though, the iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max both employ a good amount of digital stabilization anyways, so the difference that the sensor shift makes is very minimal, and I couldn't pick out the Pro Max footage from the Pro. Now going back to that larger sensor, Apple claims that it should produce better low-light photography, and it does, but only barely. There's no extra noticeable big sensor bokeh, which is something I was really looking forward to, and the photos that come out are just not enough of an improvement to justify the extra $100. The inclusion of a LiDAR sensor in both phones does unlock the night side portrait mode, but in our testing, the cropping was spotty at best and just not a good time. In daylight scenarios, both phones perform pretty much equally, and the photos that they take are on par with the ones that come out of my Pixel. Apple's computational photography has gotten much better in the years since the Pixel release, so nowadays the phones just trade blows. Apple has also added a couple of new tricks to the 12 Pro lineup this year in the form of Dolby Vision HDR video and Apple ProRAW photos. I'll say it here first. Both of these features work amazingly, but only on the iPhone. Dolby Vision video is vibrant, bright, and very well made, but I still can't edit any of it in Premiere Pro or After Effects, and Windows straight up won't play it. It'll spit out weird overexposed garbage, or it'll convert my footage to SDR instead. which kind of sucks, but hopefully Adobe will fix it eventually. That's not really Apple's problem. Apple ProRAW is even newer, and Google Photos doesn't even support editing on ProRAW photos just yet. You can only change settings in the native Apple Photos app, which is very weird names for the controls. I couldn't find white balance because it was labeled warmth for some dumb reason. Adobe also still doesn't support ProRAW, but that's to be expected since it was only introduced in iOS 14.3. So for now, think of Dolby Vision and Apple ProRAW as bonuses until everyone can get around to supporting these file formats. To me personally, I don't think it's that big of a deal right now, as Apple's regular video is already excellent, and I've never needed to use the RAW feature on my Pixel anyways. For the average user who just needs to capture moments in their life, I think the iPhone 12 Pro lineup will produce the amazing shots they need. So overall, the iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max are both very amazing devices, and I think you'll be satisfied no matter which size you pick. My recommendation though is to head to your local Apple store and actually hold the devices in person to decide which size you like better. For people who need the extra battery power, spring for the Pro Max. It has amazing battery life and I don't think you'll be disappointed by it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get my hands on the standard iPhone 12, but based on its paper specs, I think it's also worth looking into if you don't want to drop the full $1,000 on a Pro and you're fine with missing out on Pro RAW. On a side note, the standard 12 does shoot Dolby Vision video, but you will be frame rate capped at 30 FPS rather than 60. I believe this has something to do with having 4 gigs of RAM rather than 6, but I'm not entirely sure. And that pretty much wraps it up for the iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max. Apple's put out some really compelling phones this year, and I think they will be a good upgrade path for anyone with a XS or older. As for me, the 12 Pro is going to stay in my pocket, and the Pro Max is going back in the box and back to Apple. It's just too big to comfortably use for me. So, Happy New Year everyone, fingers crossed that 2021 will go a lot better than 2020, and hopefully Hello World will post more than twice this year too. Thanks for watching our iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max review. If you liked the video, please go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe to Hello World, and turn on notifications, because we'll be doing these reviews all year long. If you didn't like the video, feel free to leave a comment down below telling us what we could fix next time. How the hell did we get this review out before LTT?